Sangena thina simbingelele sinamukele isiqephini sanamhlanje se-Daily Thetha. Njengenjwayelo kuyintokozo enkulu ukuhlanganyelana nani. Igama ngumxolisiwa kwamasango kanti Fortune wakwamadlalo sign language interpreter wethu wanamhlanje. Thank you so much for joining us as we continue ukwakha isizwe one conversation at a time. So mbukeli we-Daily Thetha umasibheka izinto ezifana ne-calendar, you would really think ukuthi it's just a piece of paper, right? Kodwa ke no. Kusenjalo namhlanje sikhuluma nge-African calendar khona la ku-Daily Thetha. Ubuwazi ukuthi ikhona i-African calendar yethu njengama-Africa. Kungakho kuyabonga ukuthi abaningi esikhathini esiningi bakholelwa ukuthi why we've become so disenfranchised and so disconnected to izinto zethu zob-Africa yingoba silandela izinto zesilungu kakhulu. Kuthiwa ke yona i-calendar lesiyisebenzisayo yaziwa nge-Gregorian calendar ayisifavori thina singesizwe simnyama. Thiwa esikhathini esiningi ifavor abantu abaku-Northern hemisphere. Kungakho kuthiwa thina singama-Africa salele emuva phela ngezinto zethu ikakhulukazi ngoba silandela inkolo kungasizona ezethu. Kodwa kwenziwani and kuthiwani futhi makunjalo singama-Africa? Namhlanje siyi-Daily Thetha sibheka konke lokhu and futhi siya-expanda further on this concept of the African calendar and what it means. Is it not an outdated piece of paper, or is it not an outdated way to do izinto? What do you have to say ngale nkulumo esinayo namhlanje ohlelweni? Xhumana nathi enkundleni zethu zokuxhumana sikhona ku Facebook, Instagram kanye na ku Twitter. Kusenjalo niyazi ukuthi njengenjwayelo siyathanda phela ukuzwa ukuthi nithini lapha emakhaya. Kungakho we touching base with your social media comments. Ake sathu Facebook ke sizwe ukuthi ngabe nithini nina. Uphilani uthi yena we're in Africa but we're not using an African calendar and expect things to work in our favor. How does that make sense? I've already started using the African calendar. I started this year with a bang on the 23rd of September and inzalo yelanga with Umkhulu who's also a regular ohlelweni lethu. It was an amazing experience. I don't wait for anyone to tell me how to live my life. I follow the spirit. Do you follow the spirit when mbukeli we-Daily Thetha? What do you know about the African calendar itself? Sazise nawe lapho ekhaya because namhlanje kubaluleke kakhulu phela ukuthi sazi ukuthi kuthiwa phela this is why we're not in touch with nature and the universe as Africans. Mayeza yena uthi I support this 100% because we're going about each day as headless chickens in our land. The Gregorian calendar does not give us navigation as to what we should do on certain days and months. It also does not correlate with the celestial events in this land. We completely lost. And of course, Mayeza ke usho njalo ku Facebook. What do you have to say ngale nkulumo le esinayo? Cabanga ukuthi silahlekile siyisizwe noma ucabanga ukuthi masingahle silandele i-calendar efana ne-African calendar singalahleka more siyisizwe, or you think we should take it back to basics, back to our roots as isizwe sinsundu? What are your views? And of course xhumana nathi enkundleni zethu zokuxhumana. Kusenjalo uAba Ayilu Amlak uyena kumuntu ozosihlaziyela yona le concept ye-African calendar because there's so much to understand around it, how nature works kanye nezinye izinto. Take a look at the conversation.
Sanibonani emakhaya. Igama uAba Ayaleu Amlak, Herusekem Ankamun, Usilo Samans. First of all, in Africa, we don't have a calendar. The word calendar is of Greek, is of Latin origin, coming from the word calenduram, which means a list of accounts. And calendura means also it's an announcement of the first day of the month. In Africa, we had it totally different. We had a more natural way of life. We will use the word calendar for the sake of understanding what we are talking about. But actually, I would rather more use the word time calculation or time computation, how we computed time in Africa. African time computation is how man on earth observed natural phenomena, observed the world around him, wabona ukuthi ngesikhathi esinje unyaka nonyaka it's cyclic. Every year kwenzeka isehlo esinje. In the southern Bantu kwaXhosa, we have a signal when the year is ending called uCanzibe. Now uCanzibe is the star Canopus. When that star appears in the sky, everybody is aware now ukuthi winter is coming. It's time to harvest. Now every year the same star appears in the same spot and the same events happen. Leaves start to fall. It starts to get cold. Now based on that, they marked how many days then until the next time the same star appears? And then that calculation gives you a year.
Sure. Fascinating insights there, Nizwele and Babugele Daily Teta. Kungakho we felt it was very important to delve deeper the African calendar. And of course, we never have these conversations sort of kungakho in a studio audience say to namhlanje joining us. Guys, welcome to the program. It's great to have you all as per usual. And of course, sisambisana futhi naye ugogo Zanemvula Tsabedze, who is a custodian of African indigenous knowledge. Sikubingela sikwamukela ohlelweni.
Thokozani, thank you so much for having me.
It's only a pleasure. So I'm listening to this fascinating insight njengamanje isitshela ukuthi African calendar is not just the calendar but khona nezinye izinto ezihambisana nayo. You know, your moon, nature itself ihambisana nayo. But mhlawumbe asiqale ngeconception yesikhathi phecelezi time in the past, present and future in the African context. Mhlawumbe mangas-expandela on that for now.
And I thank you for that. I loved the clip as well. I loved the insight that he gives also into Isintu and how Amaxhosa also have the history of identifying the cosmic movement and how they were able to use that to calculate time, because the concept of time comes from the cosmic movement, and the cosmic movement involves the movement of the Earth. So we move along with the other planets. We all orbit around the sun, and it's really important for us to be cognizant of what point we are at in relation to the sun in our movement through the cosmos. And our ancestors had a very advanced understanding of that pre-colonial times. And the whole concept of the calendar comes from the origin. The origin, I think the first recorded calendar, besides the Dendera calendar, the Dendera zodiac in the Dendera temple in Egypt, in Kemet. We had in Mpumalanga, we have the first, they spoke of Inzaluyelanga. Inzaluyelanga is the first calendar in the history of mankind, and it's here in South Africa. And the way that we use that to measure time, our ancestors, I don't even, it's a very interesting one because it is so accurate. It's the most accurate placement of it's a rock formation that is used to pinpoint the cardinal points of the sun. And so the concept of time and how we measure the year comes from our movement around the sun. So when we get to that spring equinox point, that's the beginning point, that's the starting point of the year, that is the beginning of the year. And that is the beginning of what we would call a cycle. The word year came also throughout history and the development of colonization. We called it a cycle. We understood it as a cycle. It is the cycle of the earth around the sun. It is the cycle of the seasons that we go through, the phases that we go through in our natural cycle that starts with spring when everything greens again. And we understood that to be the time of the green god, Uasa, the green god who brings new life, who brings rebirth. And then we would then go through that cycle. We go then to summer, which we're now in, and the most important points, there's four most important points in that cycle. There's the spring equinox, there's the summer solstice, which we're approaching now on the 21st of December, and that is what we're actually celebrating when we're celebrating what we now understand as Christmas. Christmas they celebrate it in the northern hemisphere. They celebrate Christmas because that is the winter solstice. That's what the celebration is about. But we celebrate it in that time just because of our colonial lifestyle. But what we're actually celebrating is the summer solstice. That's why we will swim and braai, and the nature of our celebration is not the same as it is in the northern hemisphere, because we're celebrating the sun. The sun is at its closest proximity to us, and it's pumping hydrogen into our natural environment, and it's giving nature, it's pumping nature with the life that it's going to need to sustain it through the winter time when it's now moving away from us, and it starts to move away from us in the autumn equinox. That's when, like they were talking about in the clip, that's when the leaves start to fall. And that then signifies that also had its own spiritual significance. And so everything had a spiritual significance, because for Africans, our spirituality wasn't based on religion, it was based on natural science. So the science of nature. And we based everything that we understood in spirit and everything that we understood about God and the source of life to be, it was the foundation of that was all nature.
I think kuyinto futhi soqhubeka la phambili ukunaba ngayo masibuya futhi ekhefini. Ngicela ungibambele yona lapho gogo. And mbukeli weDaily Thetho uyayizwela ke nawe so besiqhubekela phambili ngayo yona lenkulumo ebaluleke kakhulu. Uyazi ukuthi kuthiwa ke ngesiAfrica akuyona just i-calendar, ziningi izinto ezenza yona le calendar ukuthi baluleke kangaka. Khona indalo, khona imvelo, khona nazo zonke izinto futhi eziningi. Siyabuya ke siya ekhefini. Join us after this. Okay, siphinde simbingele samukele khona la ku-Daily Thetha. Namhlanje siqhubekela phambili ngenkulumo ebalulekile around the-African calendar. Kuthiwa nathi sisizwe sinsundu sine-calendar yethu kufanele ngabe siyayilandela and senza izinto ngayo. And uqhubekela phambili ngale nkulumo esinayo sino baba uDr. Umathole Motshekga, who is of course yona i-historian and founder of the Gara Heritage Institute namhlanje kanye nomshumayeli welanga who's also joining us in our audience. Sinibingela sinamukele kuyintokozo enkulu kuba nani ku-Daily Thetha.
Siyabonga.
Gogo busaqhubekela phambili ngephuzu lakho mayelana nendalo nendima elidlalayo kuyo yonke le mix ye-African calendar.
And just to be brief on that, I think the most important thing to understand when you're trying to learn a calendar yetu and to understand our calendar is just to understand nature. Imvelo is the foundation of all of it, and in gaining an understanding of nature will help to align your learning and your understanding of the African calendar, because everything is so everything is evident around us in our environment and in nature. And once you have an understanding of what nature is the foundation and the root of all of it, then understanding the calendar itself becomes like breathwork.
Dr. Motshekga, sesikufaka kule nkulumo mina ngifuna ukwazi ukuthi mhlambe kuyenzeka ukuthi ngakhonakala futhi ukuthi sibe neyona i-African calendar eyodwa singabantu sonke, or this would be informed by izinto ezifana ne-location, perhaps i-geographical position yakho ukuthi ungakuphi. Kuyenzeka ukuthi sibe ne calendar eyodwa for wonke umuntu?
Our starting point should be the fact that the moral degeneration and social ills that you see ravaging our society is because we have lost touch with ourselves. We don't know who we are, where we come from, and what is our purpose in life, and where we should be going. And the African calendar is the only calendar that can reconnect us with who we are and align us with the workings of the spiritual and the material world, what Ogogo calls nature. So in other words, before we do that, we will be going nowhere. That's why we support the young people who say decolonize education, decolonize the African mind, because Africans have been captured in their minds. They are floating in the air. They are not rooted in anything. So to restore the African roots, we need to go back to the African calendar. This so-called Gregorian calendar, these were borrowed from Africa and distorted. In other words, the calendar that we follow today was initiated by the Romans, who stole it from the Egyptians and distorted it. And they didn't even know that the Egyptians come from the source of the Nile, the area of the Great Lakes, where the Bantu people come from. And these Bantu people come from Ubuntu or Punt.
Yeah.
That's the origins of all human civilization. But now when we study about ourselves, about civilization, we start in Europe, and the Europeans borrowed these things from us, distorted them, brought them back to confuse our mind. At the moment, we are confused, our young people are confused, our children are confused. We actually don't know what to teach our children. I am agreeing with Gog that the beginning is the African calendar. And also we need to know, when we say Africa, people call themselves Africans, but they don't know what Africa means. Because the word Africa, the root of the word Africa is the monosyllabic word Ra. From Ra, you have Fura or Pharaoh, popularly known as Pharaoh, which means the heavenly father or the king of heaven. So as Africans, we call our land Afura in Hebrew, Ophir, or Afuraka in Greek Africa, which means that all African people, regardless of tribal ethnic groupings, are the children of the sun. We are the children of the sun. That's why in the past they called us sun worshippers. It's true, because everything that you see is created by the sun and is sustained by the sun, because it's only the sun that produces spirit, fire, water, earth, and air. Yeah. These 5 elements are the building blocks of all reality. There is nothing that exists or will ever exist in the future which is not based on these 5 elements. And these 5 elements constitute what Gogo calls nature.
All right. Okay, umshumayeli welanga sesikufaka nawe siyamuzwa uDr Motshekga ukhuluma ngokubaluleka kwalama elements awu5. Mina ngifuna ukwazi kuwena, I think futhi into ebalulekile ayishilo ukuthi thina sesilahle ama values ethu, silahle zonke izinto ezibukeka as African esikhathini esiningi ngenxa yokuthi asayilandeli yona le calendar bekufanele ngabe siyayilandela. Mhlawumbe wena okungena kwakho la kusekuthenini senza njani singama Africa, ukhuluma mhlawumbe nangokubaluleka kwayo yona le calendar yeAfrica.
Sanibonani. We first need to recognize ukuthi njengoba sihlezi kanje, there's Christians, there's Hebrews, there's Muslims, there's Dlozis, there's Kemetists, we are all segregated in that fashion. But what can unite us is unkosisive umalangeni. Now, to speak technically, the devil lies in the details. To say an African calendar is a misnomer. Why? If you look at the stretch of the African continent, it spans 2 hemispheres. And not only that, we also have an equator running across our continent. So what we see happening down south where we are, we'll see 4 seasons. But as you're coming up, Zimbabwe, Maputo, getting closer into the equator, you'll start seeing 3 seasons. As you're coming closer to the equator, it comes down to 2. Your Ghana, those areas, it's 2. It's a wet season and the dry season. And it starts again, as you're getting out of the equator, moving up. It starts again. It goes to 3 again, and then it changes depending as you're going north into Africa. And so to arbitrarily say something that we are observing in the southern hemisphere that aligns with us, to call it the African calendar, it's arbitrary, it's a bit imperialistic. But we get the sense of what they are trying to achieve. But this does not mean that we cannot one day all agree as African countries, Uguti, we can pick one spot in the sky. Like Umkhulu Abaya pointed us to Uguti, Canopus or Mkumbika Noah, Noah's boat, that they mark that point as the start of summer course. This is something we can all agree on as the whole of Africa. Which stars hold value in your culture across the land? An example, maybe we might agree on the star Sirius. Ukiridao, as the elder Babu Muta used to teach us. It's bright. You can't miss it. If you look east around this time, you cannot miss it. It's quite bright. Maybe that is the Nomo as well. We have the Dogon in Mali. They also recognize that star. That is something we can work around. Now, I understand because of the political and historical disposition here to as abantu abamnyama, we are tending to go with anything that has to do with Westernism.
Yeah.
And I'm happy that Utata has acknowledged ukuthi, and actually, the Gregorian calendar, if you trace it back, the methods that are used there in the calendation, you will trace it back to Egypt, and not only that, you will trace it back to the Dendera stone, the oldest record of star law that we have, which simply means the Gregorian calendar, recalibrated, we can actually use it. All we have to do is rotate it 180 degrees. Then with just that, doing that, then all of us, we are starting at Asa, Osiris, or Owesilisa in Zulu. Angithi u-R no-L, Owesilisa. From the Christian context, it is the Ancient of Days. That is why Daniel Ati, his hair was white. He had hair like wool. That's the lamb. That is a constellation that you would see if you're in the north in the morning, but we're in the south. To verify what I'm saying, you would have to go out in September and you'll actually see the Aryan lamb.
And I think explore further futhi naleyo concept leyo uma masibuya cela ungibambelele khona lapho mbukelo weDaily Thetha siqhubekela phambili ngale nkulumo ebaluleke kakhulu masibuya. Stay with us.
In terms of calendar, in Africa we have names of months. Now, what is a month? A month is the movement of the moon, the different phases of the moon. Now, those different phases of the moon complete a month. Now, those phases of the moon are 30 days. This is what happens. So you have a new moon, but in Twasanyanga, inyanga iyatwasa, which is bathi abanye ke ubona inyanga ngozipho. 7 days later, you have it half. 7 days later, it's full. That's 14 days. 7 days later, it's half again. 7 days later, uzipho futhi. And then it disappears. In Africa, we don't have a week of 7 days. It never existed. It's not true. You cannot calculate it naturally. This is why even the calendar that is used now, every year changes. If you notice, if this year the 13th of May is on a Wednesday, next year the 13th of May could be on a Tuesday or could be on a Friday. Now in Africa we don't have that inconsistency or irregularity because we don't have a 7-day week. Our week in Africa is 6 days. And 6 days only. We don't have a 7th day. Example, in our Nguni languages, we say umvulo, first day, umvulo, ulwesibini, ulwesithathu, ulwesine, ulwesihlanu, umgqibelo. We don't have a day after umgqibelo because ukugqibela is ukugqibela. Finish. We only have 6 days. And these 6 days give us a month of 5 weeks. And these 5-week months, Mazi 12, give you a year.
Yo, fascinating insights there mbukeli weDaily Thetha siphinde sinibingelele sinamukele. Siyazi ke ukuthi kuthiwa amazwe i4 angahambisani nayo ikhalenda le esiyisebenzisayo thina abantu abaningi kuthiwa iGregorian calendar. Lawo mazwe Afghanistan, iIran, iEthiopia kanye neNepal kuthiwa nabo kabahambisani ke nayo le Gregorian calendar lesikhuluma ngayo kanye neAfrican calendar namhlanje le esiexpanda ngayo futhi sikhulumisana ngayo namhlanje khona la ohlelweni. Mshumayelo langa ngizokunikeza ithuba lokuthi uqhubekele phambili ngephuzu lelo bowulenza. Yazi mina manje man confused manje ukwazi ukuthi kahle kahle kule calendar yethu singama Africans sinamalanga awu6 kuphela.
Ama-calendar, depending on cosmology, ne-cosmogony, ne-metaphysical understanding yesizwe, it can change. I believe at some point, EKEMU, they had a 10-day calendar based on the number 10. There are reasons for that. You can actually go into maths, geometry, and things like that. And so to understand why the Gregorian system used amalanga au 7, you need to go into astronomy. In order to understand as well why the Western system is using a luni-solar calendar, basebenzisa inyanga nelanga. Silandela ilanga, basihlanganise. Ngoba if you only use inyanga, uba nenkinga ukuthi i-calendar yakho kuzomele ihlale i-adjustwa. Ngoba throughout unyaka, isikhathi esithathwa umhlaba, for example, manga sisenza lo yelanga, sibona we looking east, ilanga liyaphuma, lirawunde, libuye. That sifundiswa ukuthi it takes 24 hours, angithi? But that is an agreed upon average, umhlaba wonke. For umhlaba, it's actually 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds. Ne? Mara asisebenzisi umhlaba for ukuyicalculator usuku, sisebenzisa ukuhamba kwelanga. Now, ingxaki ifika ibe lana-ke. Ilanga line-ecliptic yalo. Umhlaba une-ecliptic yalo. Ama-flat earthers bangavala indlebe manje. Both these two orbs, they have their own ecliptic, which means for ilanga to do the 360 revolution, for it to come back to the same position, it has to go a bit more to align to that exact point. So you will find it's that 2356.4 plus 1 degree, which normally works out to about 4 minutes. Now, this changes throughout the year. And over time, this can create inconsistencies in your calendar, like what they had with the Gregorian. Hence, they had to bring people who were learned in astronomy. And that's the other point. We need to actually, for us to appreciate the depth of the Gregorian calendar, you need to get into astronomy. And astronomy will take you back to this system where they've borrowed from Itendero stone.
Yeah.
I
guess sibuye ngapha kuwe gogo. Gogo, I think ukhuluma into ebalekile umshumayeli welanga, and I think uma sibheka yona le Gregorian calendar kuyiyona calendar silandelayo. Ngaba ngahle kube khona ama debates amaningi on why sisebenzisa yona ne, but mina ngifuna ukwazi kuwena ngokwazi nangokucabanga kwakho kungani kuyiyona calendar le esilandelayo.
So the reason that we use this calendar is because of historically, they came, like Unkulu was saying, they took the information, bafunza, and they stole, and they took it back and they studied it and expanded on it, and then sold the information back to us throughout the colonial process and as part of the colonial agenda yabo. So that's the main reason that we use it. And I agree with some of the points that Umkhulu has brought up about the changes. We'll say, okay, at some point we were using a 10-day, we had a 10-day week. The 10-day week comes from because we had 12 months, well, we call them months now, but it's inaccurate to say there's 12 months. There's actually 13 months because there's 13 moon cycles in a complete cycle. But if we're going to go by Ama months, the months were divided by Ilanga, the seasons of the sun. And then those seasons of the sun had 30 days. Each was equally fixed into 30 days. And so those 30 days were divided into 3 weeks of 10 days, 10 days, 10 days. And that was based on our constellations. It was based on the stars. And so that's where our constellations come from. That's where astrology comes from. When we say, when I'm a Taurus, you're a Sagittarius, when I'm a Gemini, that comes from the study of those seasons. But those seasons were also then divided into the constellations, and so that's why we say, when you're born in this constellation, that's what this means. But that constellation was divided into 3 segments, and those were the 3 weeks that that we speak of. So there were different measurements of time, and it's not to say yashincha or that developed into something else. It's just that units of measurement, they decided to look at different ways of calculating time and of deciding, this is how they're going to work, the unit of measurements in which they're going to work, because you can decide you're going to look at constellations uhambe astrology, or you can decide you're going to measure the time by the sun, or you can decide you're going to use the moon calendar, the lunar calendar, which some African cultures prefer to look at them. If I'm remembering correctly, I think the Lesotho culture mainly based a lot of their cultural practices on the lunar calendar, the moon. And so that's how they would measure their time. So then they had 13 months in the year, not 12. So in whatever culture you are a descendant of, or what it is how things developed in the particular culture, and also tribally it developed differently. But the Gregorian calendar is purely based on colonization yet, is because this is what the British conglomerate imposed upon us.
Colonization isiyadlala indima
That's all.
lokho ngicela ubambele yona nekhona lapho gogo. And of course njoba siqhubekela phambili ngale nkulumo, I think iziningi izinto ezingenayo kule nkulumo around i-African calendar yethu, khona imvelo, i-nature lapho phakathi nezinye izinto futhi eziningi. Kodwa ke sifuna ukwazi ke ukuthi isho ukuthini ke i-African calendar yethu about spirituality sethu singesizwe sensundu. You don't want to miss that, uMasibuya.
In South Africa, we notice with the blossoming of the coral flower, the red coral flower, it's the new year. In Egypt, they look at the inundation of the Nile River, the flooding of the Nile River, which floods in March. And that's when Egypt starts their new year. We start our new year in September. We cannot share a calendar. Everything that is supposed to flow with us energetically is 4 months gone beyond us. We are starting to wake up when everything is already, the plane has already left the airport, the train has already left the platform. Now we get to the platform expecting to find a train, there is no train. And then we are surprised why we as black people struggle, have so many life problems, have so many inconsistencies, have so many failed dreams, have so many unaccomplished plans, is because we are not on time. And we can never be on time because we are out of time.
Yeah. We can never be on time because we're out of time. Ama insights abaluleke kakhulu lawo, and siphinde sinibingela sinamukele nisahlezi nathi khona la ku Daily Thetha siqhubekela phambili ngenkulumo yethu around the African calendar nokuthi isho ukuthini for thina isizwe sensundu. Dr. Motshekga, angazi oruzwile lento ekhulunywe la khona manje ngokuthi kuthiwa kahle uNew Year wethu uqala ngoSeptember, ingakho nje thina sinokulahleka ngoba sibamba izinto 4 months sekudala zacala. Perhaps maybe ke ngibuze kuwena ukuthi mhlambe njengoba sibona manje siyisizwe sensundu esiface so many social ills nenkinga lezo oyewakhuluma ngazo earlier. You said it was moral degeneration in a way. Ngifuna ukwazi kuwena ukuthi do you think this can be attributed to us singakwazi ukulandela i-calendar ingoba singakwazi ukulandela i-calendar?
You see, the mistake we must not make is to remember that everything that happens starts in the spiritual world. And now, when you talk about the stars, the sun, the moon, these are the physical manifestations of spiritual principles. So unless we start by understanding our spiritual worldview, we will think that there are inconsistencies, there are differences, and that as African people, we can have one calendar. The truth of the matter is that indigenous African people saw God as a woman called Queen of Heaven, Muali Wedenga, or Muali Nkulunkulu in Zulu, Muhali in Sutu, Nwari in Tsonga, Nwali in Venda. Now, that Queen of Heaven was the Virgin Mother, Mara or Maria, of the Sun God. And the Sun God created this zodiac and divided it into 12 houses. So each house has 3 groups of stars, 3 groups of 10 stars, called the decans. Now, if you multiply 3 by 10, you have 30 stars in one house. Now, if you take all the 12 houses, you will have 30 times 12 is 360. Now, the moon and the sun, they move through these 12 houses. After 360 days, they meet as husband and wife. And then that's where you have the word Ma or Maia for the moon, Ra for the sun, and then it becomes Mara of Maria, and that union gives birth to 5 elements: spirit, fire, water, earth, and air, which are personified by 5 ancestors: Osiris, Horus Ur, the elder Horus, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. And these are the 5 gods Neteru of the first time, Zeb Tebi. And then you add the birthdays of these 5 gods to 360. Then you have a year of 365 days. And this year of 365 days is divided into 4 seasons. These four seasons correspond with the 4 holy beasts before the throne of God. And these 4 holy beasts are born on the 21st of June, the 21st of September, the 21st of December, and the 21st of March. And therefore, you have 4 seasons. And the Gregorian calendar and the Europeans, they stole these 4 seasons, and out of them, they made St. John's festival, they made the Feast of the Cross in September, they made Christmas, they made Easter. So it's not their original thing. So they don't understand it. They corrupted it. So we should stay away from relating ourselves to the Gregorian calendar because it's based on confusion, on distortion. Now, again, the sun is the father, the moon is the mother. And therefore, you can't separate the solar calendar from the lunar calendar.
I think sizoyiqhubekela futhi leyo masibuye ekhefini baMotsaga ngicela ngibambele yona khona lapho baleka kakhulu ukuthi manje sihambe siyothengisa, and of course masibuya we just continue ngenkulumo yethu but also consolidate sibone ukuthi singama Africa sibuyisana kanjani and how do we find a common ground kuko konke lokho. Hlala nathi. Siphinde sinibingelele sinamukele nisahlezi nathi khona la ku SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Siqhubekela phambili ngenkulumo yethu around the ancient African calendar, kuyi calendar ekuthiwa kuyiyona ngabe siyayisebenzisa as ama building blocks for impilo zethu siyisizwe esinsundu. baMotsaga ngizokunika isikhathi ukuthi uqhubekele phambili ngephuzu lele bolulenza baba.
The solar calendar starts in June. The lunar calendar starts in September. That's the African Lunar New Year, which corresponds with the beginning of the plowing season. And therefore, we must celebrate our New Year in September, not in January. And then in October, we hold rain-making ceremonies to thank the goddess, the Queen of Heaven, for bringing us water, rain, and fertility of the earth. Now, in October, in November, nature is reborn because the seeds planted in September and October, they grow. And therefore, in November, we must respect nature, don't kill female animals, and don't cut trees. In December, we must prepare for first fruits festivals, and then which start formally during the full moon in December. And then between the 21st of December and the 26th, what people celebrate as Christmas is actually the first fruits celebration that all of us must have planted, must have harvested, and then we must eat the fresh fruits. And then from January, then you have the harvest, because everything is ripe now. You have harvest. We must then reap and enjoy. But on the 1st of May is the birthday of the Queen of Heaven, and then we celebrate that as Mohali Day. Is the beginning of the initiation period. And when the star Canopus appears on the 25th of May, it is the official opening of the initiation schools. And therefore, all the young people, the girls, they must go for initiation to be taught about life and all this cosmology. And that initiation ends up at the end of August. So African life is ordered from above. We are controlled by spiritual principles, so there's no confusion in Africa. The only confusion comes when you use European astrology and astronomy, and you use the Gregorian calendar. That's where the problem comes.
Like yena khona inkinga. Gogo sesiyivala inkulumo mhlawumbe amazwi wakho oqina athini?
No, mine is to say ukuthi it doesn't matter ukuthi maybe you are Kola or you're Christian or you're Muslim or the point of spirituality of any kind is to align. You want to be in alignment. And ukuthola kwami kwe-African calendar was in my search for the root of my spirituality, my indigenous spirituality. And that's how I came across this information and how I dove deep into it and seek to understand what it is about and what is its relevance to me. And the most important thing to understand is that if you are engaging in any kind of spiritual practice, the point is to align. If you, whatever spiritual, anything that you're doing, if it is not aligning you with your purpose and aligning you with your gifts and aligning you with nature, then it's a waste of energy and a waste of time, because you want to align so that you can live to your fullest potential and you can manifest.
These conversations are actually helping us align. Okay, my Africa, this is your left foot, this is your right foot. Now left foot forward march from the heart or something. These conversations, of which we do not have right now, because a Christian, Masiti March, when we are going into autumn, Christians celebrate a spring. They are passing over. They are Good Friday, Good Friday. That is a spring ritual. When we see halalizela spring, they are mourning, they are in sackcloth because they are doing Feast of Tents. So, and so you will find in the Bible, your feast days and holy days have become an abomination. Because umalangeni, the great unifier, maya pezulu, tina, because we are stoned by the religions. Just to give a quick example, when you flip the Gregorian calendar, we just came from August, September, going into November.
Yes.
In August, that is where we place Umkhosi Wethu Wohlanga.
Yes.
Now, if you flip the Gregorian calendar, that is where, okay, Umkhosi Wohlanga, that's fertility. You flip the Gregorian, we are putting Valentine's Day. We are also putting the feast, the commemoration of the purification of the Sacred Virgin. So just like that, by flipping it 180 degrees, bam, we are all in line. We are all in line. Because Umkhosi Wohlanga, we are still dealing with fertility. We are still dealing with of the feminine aspect. It is not by coincidence that if we beg at the church Ushembe, their candle mass ceremony, where they've placed it. They've placed it in July. Because in July, from the 21st, as Ubabeshile, from the 21st of June, our son is reborn. So when we get into July, that's a month. And so
Wow, fascinating. Thank you so very much for those insights. And sibonge kakhulu nakuyivakashi zethu namhlanje ukuthi zize la ku Daily Thetha. Mbukelo we Daily Thetha kwamina nje I'm still taking in yonke into esizwile namhlanje ukuhamba ukubona and ukuhlala phansi ukukhuluma as well into ebalekile leyo. Si Daily Thetha we started the conversation ngoba kubalekile ukuthi sazi imvelaphi yethu as well. Sibonge kakhulu ukuthi nibe nathi namhlanje. Till next time and sale kahle. Thank you so much.